in the spring of 74, 75, when they talked me into grabbing a specific type of car and bring it down, and then their chop shops would cut in all the compartments for it. And they taught me how to smuggle when I was 19, my first crossing. By then I was already working for the Sinaloa Cartel. I got home to 350 kilos sitting in my driveway, 100 kilo minimums, but was doing more than that. I remember having dinner at certain ranches where I would see bound people load in the back of the truck, hear the crack in the distance, and 30 minutes later, they're coming back, sitting at the same table with me eating dinner.
Dr. Hal Bradley is a pastor and a social worker in Seattle, Washington. But for over 20 years, he was the largest distributor for the Sinaloa Cartel in the entire Pacific Northwest. A chance trip to Mexico when he was just 15 years old back in 1969 put him in contact with some of the future bosses of what would become the Guadalajara and later the Sinaloa Cartel, people like Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo and Joaquin Chapo Guzman. After spending his early years running loads across the border for the cartel, by 1989, he was the exclusive distributor for the organization in the Pacific Northwest, from Portland, Oregon, all the way up into Canada and Alaska. He was quite literally an underboss of the Sinaloa organization. That's how official this guy was. But then he abruptly chose to turn himself in, and for the next 25 years or so, he operated as a mercenary for the DEA and the CIA, conducting undercover drug missions all over Mexico and Latin America, where he was nearly killed more than a handful of times. Today, he works with recovering addicts in the Seattle area, and he's an author of many novels that detail his time both in the cartel and working with the feds. Go to drhalbradley.com to check out all of his books, including his bestseller and autobiography, A Fox in the Lion's Den. And of course, for more stories with Hal, go check out that Patreon, patreon.com/TheConnect You guys, this is one of the craziest interviews I've ever done. I promise you. Without further ado, buckle up. This one will leave you with your jaw on the floor. Dr. Hal Bradley, right here on The Connect with Johnny Mitchell.
I didn't want to live that life anymore. When you fight something as powerful as a drug cartel, you better have a bigger baseball bat. And who bigger than the Department of Justice? I thought I was going to disassemble the Pacific Northwest faction controlled by the cartel that controlled me. That's when I got kidnapped. They kept the bag on my head as they were beating me. And I remember hearing the screams of the two men that were with me, and then their screams stopped. And then I remember nothing.
That's when I see the lights behind me start to flash. And I didn't even think, I just hit it. I was driving like my life depended on it. Then I parked the car, hopped out, closed the door, and I started running.
And he pulls out a burner, a shank, it's like 6 inches. And he passes it to me. And he goes, here, that's yours. Don't ever leave the cell block without this. He was the reason I made it out of that place alive.
Now, do you think that the cartels historically have relied on gringos even more than their own people to actually traffic the drugs once they make it into the U.S.?
No, they rely upon themselves in those days. They told me, aquí en su corazón vive la sangre de la ciudad. In the village that I lived in as a child, they said, the blood of this village pumps in your heart. One day return to your village. And that's how I became involved. So I'm the only gringo I've ever known that carried that type of status, that type of love and trust. I was one of the children.
What do you think it was about you that they...
My genuine love for them right from day one. I'd never even heard Spanish spoken. I was from Edmonds, Washington, north of Seattle. And we should save this for the story because it's really good, and I'm going to lay it out.
Oh, we're telling the story already. We're in
okay,
it.
Good.
Yeah.
I got caught smoking a cigarette with two friends in 1969 at Edmonds High School. And back in those days, you got kicked out for a half a year. And my mother didn't want her son wandering the streets. She was a divorced woman raising 4 children on her own. But she had a friend that owned 11% of the Anaconda de Mexico Mining Corporation. He was a Sicilian guy, and she was his mistress for 20 years.
Wow.
Very connected guy.
Wow.
And he saw something even then in me at the age of 15 that made me different than the other kids. All of my brothers and sisters are extremely straight people, have lived very successful lives. I'm the only one that ever stepped outside of that world. And so they sent me to Mexico. He took me down. I spent a week and introduced me to my personal bodyguard that would protect me while I was in country. His name was Mimo. And he used to carry a machete slung through the back of his back where he could reach over and pull it out, and a gun on his hip. And his life depended on my life returning to the States someday. So he was committed to that regard. But The village was only a couple hundred people. They were adobe houses.
Where was this in Mexico?
This is on the border of Zacatecas and Durango in a town called Walterio. Wow. So about 70 clicks north of Durango, heading towards the state of Durango, from the city of Durango, excuse me. And Vicente Guerrero was a town of maybe 10 to 15,000 population, which was the closest number. So I was extremely remote. And the mining camp that I was at was just outside of Walterio, about 2 kilometers. Mm-hmm. And we would bathe in a big pond on the weekends, all of the people. We'd have these beautiful feasts where they would cook food and play music. And that's how I lived.
Wow. And you really took to it, it sounds like. You loved it.
I'd never heard Spanish before. They didn't have one person that spoke English. Yeah. So right away, I started writing down every word I could compare. And within a few months, I had the language starting to where we could communicate. But the mothers and daughters loved me. The fathers and sons hated me because all of them saw this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. And their daughters were just in love with that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm 15, so you know how you are at 15.
Sure.
And
boner time.
But there wasn't a house that I wasn't welcome in at any time. Wow. And they just took me as one of their own.
What were they mining?
We were mining zinc and silver.
Okay.
But primarily zinc. But we had silver traces coming in through the mine.
Did most of the people in that town work in the mine?
No.
What do they do?
It was actually a cartel-controlled mine.
I see.
It wasn't known up here in America. My mother didn't know. Nobody knew. They were mainly processing heroin. And I'm not going to say the name of the cartel family out of respect. Even when I walked in, I never violated my village. Mm-hmm. I never violated that family. Right. And they're a very famous family.
Okay, but back then in 69, correct me if I'm wrong, but history tells us that there weren't cartels as we know them today. They were just families.
They were syndicates. They were organized crime families, and they were of their territory. They didn't conglomerate like Angel Gallardo formed the union of all of the cartels. That was many years later to come.
So in the late 60s in Durango, which is part of the Golden Triangle, as they call it.
Part of the triangle, yes.
Durango, Sinaloa, and Chihuahua?
No, Sonora.
Sonora, right.
Yeah, Sonora, Chihuahua. No, Sonora. Well, you had Sonora, you had Durango, and you had Sinaloa. Right. That's a triangle. And then Jalisco. Jalisco was the area where Rafael Cara Quintero controlled later. But we're getting ahead of ourselves in the story.
So in 69, was it mainly marijuana they were growing, or had poppy production happened?
And you know how Mexico got into the heroin business? We put them in it in World War II. We were running out of morphine for the European campaign and the South Pacific campaign, so the State Department went to Mexico and said, well, let's train your farmers to grow poppies so we can produce morphine. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And what happened was after World War II, our representatives in the State Department didn't go back and train them to grow something else. So the first generation of the heroin producers, the opium farmers, was created by the Department of Justice from America.
Wow. How many stories are like that of our foreign escapades, right?
Pretty amazing. Now we're 3 to 4 generations into families that are now cartels that grow it, and they don't see nothing wrong with it because their grandfathers did it, their fathers did it.
Now, when you're 15 down there, did you see any of this? Did you see poppy fields?
Absolutely. I used to ride my burro alongside the poppy fields daily. I'd see the Chowari Indians. They would come down off the ridges. At first, when I got down there, they were afraid to come near me, because Mimo, the man who was in charge of me, was a very dangerous man, and they knew right off that I belonged to him. I was under his protection. But as time went on, the months rolled by, the Chowari Indians, they would wave at me, and the people out there harvesting the opium from the bulbs, they started waving and coming up to me, and so within months I had it. And the Chowari Indians, they would take corn husks from corn and fill it full of marijuana, and they'd roll these big, fat, whatever you want to call them.
Joints?
And they would sit around at night around campfires and they'd smoke it and pass it. And they allowed me into that culture.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it that way for thousands of years.
Wow. Yeah. Did you know what heroin was?
No, I just saw beautiful fields full of really pretty flowers. I had no idea.
Right.
None. And my burro, he had, before I got him, he had already done those trails and passed.
Right.
They gave me a burro that was trained when I first got up there so I could go down to the town at night and he would know how to get me back and all of that. And I met Ramon Arellano Felix. Have you ever heard that name?
Wow, from the Tijuana Cartel?
The Tijuana corridor. Ramon was 7 years old, and he came with, I believe, an uncle who was a friend of Mimo, the man in charge of me. And Ramon and I would take off on the burros together, and I was 15 at the time, 15, 16.
What connection did his family have to that town?
The man that was my personal bodyguard was a friend to a member of their family, and they would come and visit. Ramon came down 2 times that I can remember clearly, but I think it was 3. But he would come, and him and I kind of became friends,
Yeah.
So I hear him riding with Ramon Arellano Felix when he's 7 years old, 8 years old. And we documented all of that because we knew the significance of history later would be important.
Right.
So later years, I did go to Tijuana and I did look up Ramon.
Wow.
And I did see him. And I mean, we literally wept and went out and snorted coke and got laid for 3 days and went crazy. And by then I was already working for the Sinaloa Cartel.
Yeah.
But he just told me, you can't say that. They'll kill you, you know.
Now, so it sounds like his family were already getting into the trade.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was marijuana first.
Yeah.
We were all until 79. That's when I started getting my first loads of cocaine. But up until then, for about 5 years, I was driving loads north out of Sinaloa State and through Sonora, entering in through Nogales, Calexico, Mexicali. I can remember coming through Tijuana and watching one of my compadres up on the bridge waving at me as I was driving right under him with the car going into check stations. And pretty amazing. I never got caught. I did probably more than 70 runs.
Wow.
Never got caught.
Of marijuana.
Of marijuana. Yeah, by the time I was doing coke, I was flying.
How much marijuana were you taking at a time?
We could pack in about 80 kilos per car, and I had my college. I was in college at the time, and I had some of my other guys recruited into bringing their cars. And oh Christ, I mean, I built an empire at that time just with a bunch of college students living on GI Bill and unemployment checks. And the next thing you know, we're making $50,000, $60,000 at a time, and this is in the 70s.
Yeah,
it started in 75 when I did my first run through Nogales.
So how did it, so backing up to 69 when you're 15, you were only supposed to be down in this little town for the summer, right?
No, it was a semester and then it extended on. I was down there about a year and a half.
And did your mother know about
She had no knowledge
the
of any of
poppies
that.
and these cartels?
No.
Did your, her lover that owned the mine?
Yes, he did. He was in the business.
He was in the business of heroin as well?
He was a Sicilian. He was in a lot of businesses. He was a very wealthy man, a powerful man.
Now, how did that arrangement work between the mine, his ownership, and what he gave the families? Were they partners in it?
What worked was they produced cash from the harvesting of the heroin, and they just employed people to run the mines. The mine really never was meant or designed to make money, although it made a hell of a lot of money.
Right.
And it was a front operation.
Sure.
I was in country about 3 months. I witnessed my first execution, sitting there having a bite to eat in the cafeteria with Mimo. And this guy walks in, and Blue walked right up to this guy at the table next to me and blew his brains out right beside me. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this. I've never seen anything past fistfights in my life, you know, and this is death. And Mimo told me to stay seated, and he took the guy out there and talked to him, and he came back and says, "Don't ever tell anybody what you see here at the mine, ever." And I never brought it up until I started writing the book 6 years ago. I kept all of the secrets.
What did that do to you?
It was just reality. For some reason, I understood and accepted it, and I was by far not the first execution I've witnessed, but it was the first execution.
Weren't you afraid to die at 15?
I think curiosity played into it more than the fear of death. I'm in a new culture, a new society. I don't understand their language. I'd only been there a few months by the time I witnessed that first execution. And
so you weren't abhorred morally yet?
No.
Yeah, that would come into play later.
Mem would talk to me every day. He explained to me that I'm in a different world. He spoke English. He wasn't of the village. He was specifically assigned to protect me. You know, I was this Sicilian's family, so to speak, and they would have killed him if something would have happened to me. That was it. Memo told me that himself.
Mm-hmm.
He says, don't wander off, don't do nothing. I need to know where you're at.
Did you tell your mother that you witnessed an execution?
No, I've never told anybody until 5 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so you stayed down there for a year and a half. Did you get involved while you were down there, or would that come later?
That came later, but what I did get involved with is the love for the village, the commitment to them forever. And to this day, I carry it so deeply in my heart.
Wow.
I've never been loved by anybody like I was by that entire village. And they treated me like one of the children. You know, they didn't treat me special or anything. Yeah. And it's a very beautiful thing. My love for Mexico is, imprinted in me because of that. Even with all the horrors I've seen and survived.
Yeah. It's a great country in
It's
many ways.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry the cartels have taken it over.
Guys, it's summertime, and what's the use of spending all that time in the gym just to look hot, like a Adonis? You're sweating, a girl notices you, you go back to your place. She doesn't even make you shower or wash up. She just wants to get straight into bed with you, but bam, you're limp and your performance is worse than that national anthem at the home run derby by that crazy chick. I've been there. I know our guest Hal has been there, but thanks to BLUECHEW, you don't have to worry about that. I love BLUECHEW. I would do these ad reads for free if I'm being honest. BLUECHEW is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but at a fraction of the cost and in a chewable form. The process is simple. Sign up at BLUECHEW.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. BLUECHEW tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped directly to your door. The best part? It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. You can take them anytime, day or night. Well, why couldn't you? So you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. BLUECHEW wants you to have better sex. Discover your options at BLUECHEW.com. BLUECHEW tablets let you get back in the game and start enjoying sex again. Little Limp Larry is done. Say bye-bye. It's not big, but at least it gets hard, rock hard. It's time to say hello to Rock Hard Randy, that's my uncle, and get your confidence back. You might not be the best looking dude in town, have the best personality, or even be the funny guy. Hell, why are you even alive? But when word gets out about the new Sex Panther on the prowl, none of that will matter anymore. You'll be swimming in a sea of ass with your mast raised high. BLUECHEW wants the entire country rock hard. They told me so. They emailed and they called me. That's their mission. They will not stop until every man and trans man is bricked up like a brick house. I'm getting bricked just talking about it. They want every tent pitched, every rod raised. Discover your options at BLUECHEW.com. We've got a special deal for our listeners right now. Try BLUECHEW free. Ya, gratis, puro gratis, sin costo. BLUECHEW free when you use our promo code Mitchell at checkout. Just pay $5 in shipping. That's BLUECHEW.com with the promo code Mitchell to receive your first month free. Visit BLUECHEW.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank BLUECHEW for sponsoring this podcast. All right, let's get back to Hal. Now, you must have learned Spanish perfectly after a year and a half.
I learned it semi-fluently at the time, but over the years I've forgotten it. And, 5 years ago when I got hit, I've had memory lapses since then. I was in the death throes in the final moments of life. And we can get into it later or whatever, I don't care. But thinking about it right this minute, I had already released being in this world, and I was very happy. I was at peace as the guy was still stabbing me because I knew I was going to be dead in seconds. And I just let go. I gave all this up. And,
that's a freeing, liberating feeling, though, to know that when your time actually does come, you'll be at...
It's a blessing.
Wow.
Because I just felt the love of God. I knew that I was encompassed, And my PTSD doctors that I deal with were very worried for months because they thought that I might try to commit suicide because I kept reiterating to them how ready I was and how wonderful it felt. And I was just done with the world, It was coming to its end as the next part of the journey.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. As a doctor myself, I look back through that experience and I cherish it. you know. And as a hospice chaplain, I take people through the dying process all the time. And I really know how important it is to make them ready and prepared to take that final entry stage into that next life.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love doing hospice. I love it.
Wow.
It's such a blessing.
Well, we'll get there. So you spent a year and a half in this Pueblita.
Yeah, a little bit less than a year and a half, about 14 months, I think. But yeah.
And then you go back to Everett, Seattle.
Yeah.
Finish out high school?
No, my brother had been wounded in action in Vietnam. I went home, Bremerton Hospital, and my brother was in a hospital bed there, my older brother. And I was afraid to leave him because I thought it would be the last time I'd ever see him. And I spent time on the ward, and I'm looking at all these young men with various wounds from combat. And I was so angry and so upset they had hurt my brother, who has been my idol my whole life. And that I said, I'm going to join the Army. Now I'm 16. Wow. So what I did is I went to the community college, signed up for the GED, got my GED, and 2 weeks before I turned 17, I took my oath to go into the Army. But I had to wait till I was 17 to actually go in.
Right.
So, I mean, I was a paratrooper before I was 18. I had silver wings on my chest at 17.
Okay, so did you go to Vietnam?
No, I did not. I went to Germany.
Okay.
My brother was wounded in action in Vietnam.
I see.
I was in, the war ended in September of 75. I was in from 71 to 74.
Okay. And what were you doing in Germany?
I was a paratrooper. I was,
what kind of action was there in Germany in 71?
Well, we would pull guard duty at Missile Institution, or we'd be up on the Czechoslovakian border. At that time, I've been to Berlin, at Checkpoint Charlie, and we were used mainly in those capacities at that time. And the beautiful thing was my brother was actually an embassy guard for the United States Marine Corps in Frankfurt at the time that I was in country. So I got to see my brother, and then our father came over, since both of his sons were there where he was at in World War II. And we took 30-day leaves, and our dad traveled us throughout all the areas he was at during the war. And
incredible.
And, it really was. It was an amazing time. And then John got transferred to Russia, and I got injured in a parachute fall and was medevac stateside and ETS'd out March 74.
So March 74, you're a civilian again?
Yeah, I was at the Martinez VA hospital after leaving the Presidio hospital.
Right.
And then when I left the Martinez VA hospital, I went up to Ukiah, Mendocino County, and then Sacramento, and decided to go back to Mexico and visit my village.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. So I was down there in the spring of 74, 75, when they talked me into grabbing a specific type of car and bring it down, and then their chop shops would cut in all the compartments for it. And it was brilliantly designed. Back in those days, they didn't have the x-ray machines or nothing. Right. And they set it up, and they would dip my prepared kilos of marijuana in a liquid oil. So dog penetration was not a worry. We didn't have to worry about dope dogs.
Wow.
I mean, they had it down, and we would drill a couple holes in the trunk of the car. So by the time I made it to the border, which was 800 or 900 miles, a dust would accumulate. So when they would open up the trunk to inspect the car, it looked like normal.
Right. You've been driving all day. Yeah.
And they taught me how to smuggle when I was 19, my first crossing, and spray deodorant on your face, wear sunglasses that aren't too dark or not too light, look the officer directly in the eye and answer all of his questions calmly, and you're going to go through. Wow. And that's how I did it.
Yeah. And you made 70 runs.
Over. Yeah.
Wow. So you said you're going to college at this time?
Yeah, I was using the GI Bill, but I started making so much money doing the pot trade that I went ahead and dropped out of school. And then shortly after that, I bought a plane, got a pilot's license, and then got another plane that was a little bit larger and started making hops down into the Arizona desert. Right. And the Yaqui Indians have a reservation, half in Mexico and half in America. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell. And so we had permission through the cartels, because by then we had cartels, to do the canyon flying through their reservation. And then about 200 miles north of Hermosillo, there was a rancher we cut out with bulldozers, an airstrip. So I'd get there, and they would pack the cocaine into the plane there, and then I would take it and fly it back stateside.
So you weren't making any weed drops when you had your plane?
No.
You'd switched entirely to coke. And what year is that?
79.
Okay.
What happened, I was just going down originally I was back there picking up more marijuana and had my other two cars that were following me doing the same thing. And he says, oh, no more. We're not doing this no more. And he says, we want you. So the first time I did bring cocaine in through a car, It was after that I got the plane and did that.
I see. So you must have done fabulously in the weed business to be able to buy a couple of planes, right?
Yeah, we did okay.
Now, did you have your own customer base, or were you just giving it to who they wanted you to give it to?
No, I had a man in Winters, California, just up north of Sacramento, and he had a ranch out in that area, and his barn was that was our head of operations. And that's who we would give it to for distribution. He would pay me so much a pound at that time.
Right.
And so I just had one customer I sold to.
So you're strictly smuggling. You're strictly transporting.
And selling. It was my marijuana, not his. I did it for me.
Okay, so you had your own. So you were giving it to him.
It was my own game. I built my own operation. But I stayed safe, brother, because I had one person buying it all.
Right.
And then he got taken out by the feds. And then I spent about a year or so out of the business, went right back to being a poor student. That money comes fast and goes fast when you live in that world.
Yeah.
And, but then somebody came up from Mexico and approached me, and that's how I got back in. And,
back then, did Cartel have distribution of their own in the United States, or were they simply giving it to runners like you, and then you guys just free market after it crosses the border? You sell it to whoever your clientele is.
No,
how did it work?
They absolutely had brokers in the United States, but what they didn't have was somebody that was blonde hair, blue-eyed from the village, and made it a very unique scenario. So I was given a lot of free gratis to grow it myself. You know, I built the transportation trade routes. We didn't stay just on Interstate 5. I mean, you know, there's spotters and there's people that are trained in law enforcement to detect such activity.
Yeah.
So I figured out different routes to get it all the way into Vancouver, Canada. I put it on, you'll read in my book, A Fox in the Lion's Den, how we took and used the maritime ferry, and I was running as much as 50 kilos of cocaine at a time into Alaska.
Yeah.
In those,
which is hugely profitable to sell coke in Alaska, right?
Well, you know, an Alaskan 20 is a $50 bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were doing the pipelines at that time and stuff, and we couldn't satisfy the nature. But I had an organized crime syndicate in Anchorage that they were my only client, and I would deliver to them.
Yeah. And what are you getting a kilo of coke for?
Oh, I think at that time, now that's early 80s, cocaine was pretty high. I think I was getting it at about 18 to 19,000 a kilo, 100 kilo minimums, but it was doing more than that. And I was moving it up there at 28 to 30,000 a kilo.
Yeah.
And I'm popping off 50 at a time. So I was making a couple $100,000 in my pocket after everybody's expenses.
Right.
2 times a month.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Not counting Vancouver, not counting Seattle.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get out. So basically you're now in 79, 80. It's fully transitioned. Your operation's fully transitioned.
Yeah,
to
I'm strictly cocaine. And I got busted in 84 in Sacramento. I had a small amount found in the house, and they were excited when they found it and arrested. I wasn't home. They hit my house when I wasn't home, but left the arrest warrants on my table when I got home. So I ran out in the garage, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, I'm really going down hard, because up in the rafters, I had concealed an area where I had it just packed full of kilos of cocaine, and all they got were like a couple 100 grams. Wow. But it was enough to put me away for 3 years, and I paroled out of Folsom prison in 1989 with the D number. D64038. That's an original number. If your audience wants to look it up,
what does that mean? Could you tell us?
Well, D64038. Now they have double-digit numbers. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of more people have gone to prison since the time we were in there. But Folsom, I'd never even been arrested in my life. I'd never been in jail in my life. It was my first experience. And so going into Folsom prison for a first time ever is pretty radical, especially in the 80s when they were rounding up the Southern California gangs. You know, we had the Bloods, the Crips, the Surs, and Norteños. The Aryan Brotherhood even answered to La EME, the Mexican Mafia.
Yeah. I can't imagine how wild Folsom was.
Well, I was blessed because, one, the Aryan Nation attached me immediately because they saw that the high-ranking Mexicans in the yard were in touch with me right away. Word was sent in that this gabacho, this gringo, it belongs to our family in Mexico. Make sure he goes without nothing. Make sure he is protected. We want him to return to us. And the Aryan Nation caught wind of that and went, what the hell is going on? So I actually became somebody who could go in between the two races because everything is separated by race in federal, state prison and federal. But Yeah, it was an interesting time.
And you must have been so unusual because you're this high-level drug trafficker, but you're in a state prison. So they don't see a lot of guys like you in there.
No, they don't see hardly any. Mainly guys like me are federal level.
Right.
We go into which I did go in the feds later. But
so backing up a little, between 79 and 84, when you did your first stint in prison, how did you see the organizations down in Mexico changing and evolving?
Well, as stated, that's a very good question, John. As stated, they protected me even going into prison. So by then, we were very well established. You're talking 1984. Cocaine had now been on the West Coast comfortably about 5 years at that time. You know, Griselda, who was the representative in Miami for Don Pablo, who was our boss, who the cartels were getting from Don's organization. When Griselda fell here in California, that pretty well evaporated everything for the Miami flows and all of that was going through there. The Cali Cartel continued on in Florida.
I see. And, but when Griselda went down, you think that
that really crippled them. It made going through Mexico instead of through the Caribbean the optimum resource for their kilos to make it to the American markets.
And you said you met Pablo Escobar?
No, I did not meet Pablo. Okay. If I said that earlier, that's a misconception. I was involved with Pablo's business. His kilos had the soccer ball symbol on them. That's how DEA formed Operation Northern Exposure to take me out.
Okay.
They took a 38-kilo bust one night in downtown Seattle. The guy had just left my house. It was a $1.5 million deal, and I gave him half down, and the next day to do the rest of the deal.
Right.
And they grabbed him at an Anthony's restaurant in the parking lot. And they thought they were only getting a guy with a couple kilos, and they opened up the trunk, and there's damn near 40 keys. Wow. And then they saw the soccer balls on them. And that's when the State Department and Department of Justice jumped in and said, hey, we got an Escobar representative up here in the Pacific Northwest. And Operation Northern Exposure was formed in 1991. That's when that
Pablo's soccer balls made it all the way from Medellin, Colombia, all the way up to Seattle, Washington.
That's what put the heat on me.
I see.
Yeah, they were used to seeing the Alacran, the Scorpion stamps, or the USAs, or the ones that had lot numbers, Estrelas. Those were the kilo brands from the Mexican cartels.
Now, you said the Mexican organization that you were working with or for was actually working for Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, directly.
Were they working for him, or were they just buying from him? Because, at a certain point, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, I say his full name.
That's his full name.
His he at least in lore, popular culture, broke the monopoly that the Colombians had, and instead of working for them, they started essentially buying from them and getting paid in cocaine. So for every 1 kilo of coke that they moved for the Colombians, they would get one for free. And
it was something like that. That's not necessarily true. Okay, I did know Miguel Angel personally. I did meet him a few times in Jalisco when he had transferred to Guadalajara and set up his organization there. That's where I knew Rafael Caracantero, and he was from Culiacan, Sinaloa area.
Right.
Rafa and Chapo. And at that time, Chapo was just a weed merchant like I was. Right. So that's how I knew Chapo,
So you knew Chapo from the weed days?
Yes, I did. I sent you a picture of me with Chapo, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. I would be careful showing that.
Now, is he, it's going to go in the episode.
Yeah.
But only a couple 100,000 people will see it.
Doesn't matter to me, brother.
What was he like?
Hungry and anxious. He knew he was more than what he was at that time in his life. He knew. Chapo knew very well. And in later years, I was at a cartel wedding in Culiacan. That would have been in 91 or 92. And I was sitting at the table of bosses. My wife was sitting across the plaza area with the wives and mistresses. And then at the main table of the wedding with the wedded couple and their parents there. And Los Tigres de la Norte, a very famous Mexican band, were playing at this wedding that night. And all of a sudden, these guys come running into the place, and they all got AK-47s. And the band went silent. And I remember somebody went back out of the area we were at, and then they brought El Chapo in. And he walked straight to the wedded couple, gave them a present, paid his respect. And then he came over to the table of bosses where I was sitting. And they were saying, when they introduced me to Chapo, they're saying, this is our friend from the Pacific Northwest.
Wow.
And Chapo told me, he says, "Oh, I remember you," and he gave me a hug, and it was really an emotional moment.
Wow!
But
so he's a nice guy.
Well, I think Chapo was what Chapo was. I'm not going to comment on
Polite
nice.
is a better word.
Yeah, ruthless.
Yeah.
Scary.
Was he as ruthless as they say he was?
More.
Okay.
More.
Put a pin in that. So,
thank you. I don't
how
want to talk
were
about
by
that.
'84 the family you were working with in Mexico? Were they still just couriers for Pablo Escobar, or were they, to your knowledge, were they actually clients of his?
Well, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, which I'm very proud of you for knowing his name for being a gringo. That's very impressive. He was already in construction of formulating the syndicate with all of the cartels. That was what was going on at that specific time. And, you know, the angel of the skies and all of that. He was up there in Juarez. In my books, I write about that in my novels. And
so
Pablo was in charge still.
And when you say that, what do you mean by that?
Well, Pablo had all the cards. Pablo was ruthless. We call it Medellin, the school of Medellin. And what he did was he taught the cartels how to do torture tactics. He taught them how to do all of the extreme violence. The cartels were not that violent at the time. They weren't giving acid baths. They weren't, doing the multiple beheadings and the body mutilations at that time. They would just walk up and shoot you, and that was it. He taught the art of torture, the true torture.
Really?
What I survived, what you know about. He maintained control until probably 89 or 90.
When he was on the run.
Yeah. And, it was Chapo that broke the back on that. It wasn't Miguel.
Really?
Chapo went down. Yeah, this is stuff people don't know.
Okay.
Chapo went down to Medellin, and he told him, "I can move so many tons for you, and I can have it up in the States in a couple days." And Don Pablo told him, "Well, if you can do that," he says, "we'll go in business with you." And by God, Chapo did it.
Wow.
And he was using the angel of the skies.
Señor de los cielos.
Yeah. De los cielos. Very good. Yeah. He was using him, and they together formed the union, and they made the Juarez cartel the corridor for entry into the United States. That was all built by them. But that was Chapo.
Okay.
And by then he was digging tunnels in the desert, and then, the Calexico tunnels, the Mexicali tunnels, all of that stuff. And the one in Tijuana, which is in Narcos, that show Narcos, that really happened that way, by the way. DEA saw the fans blowing and all of that. I've actually talked to agents that were involved when I was undercover and operational. Wow. Pretty amazing. I was down in Mexico when Rafael killed Special Agent Kiki Camarena. I was there. And it was very, very heartbreaking. I knew they'd made a critical error, and I was down there packing cars, getting ready to head north. And the DEA, the United States government, man, I mean, they hit them like you would not believe, and they instantly stopped the flow of drugs for about 7 or 8 months going into America. They had to take what we had up here stateside and live off of that until they could reclamate the problem that was created by Rafa.
What did you do in that time? Did you just hold on to your bricks?
I got the hell out of there, and I stayed out of there. And but I remember being debriefed by agents when I first walked in. Having a drug kingpin walk in, that's not under arrest. They weren't close to getting me. It wasn't about that at all. I went down there to negotiate my time. I had my millions. I had my real estate holdings. They can look up Snohomish County records and look up my name, and they can see what I had. It's public information. I was done. And they gave me hugs and handshakes, and I got home to 350 kilos of cocaine sitting in my driveway. So because I am an underboss, I had the ability to turn the load around. I told the two soldados, the soldiers that brought it to me, were heated up federally, get that the hell out of here. And the next day I walked in.
Wow.
That's when I made my choice.
When you were an underboss, you were the biggest distributor of cocaine in the Northwest of America and Canada.
In its history, yes.
Are you utilizing, how is the coke getting to you now that Chapo is firmly entrenched with the Colombians? Are you picking it up stateside after it gets smuggled over?
As I just stated, they would drive it right to my driveway at that point and bring it to me. I was too valuable, too important. I was building the empire. And my best friend in the drug business, a guy named Pat Grady, Vietnam vet, war hero, he in the 80s, the early 80s, we connected and started the building of the cocaine business in Seattle. Pat Grady was the one that introduced me. And if you look at that book, The Fox and the Lion's Den, you'll see a picture of him, and it's dedicated to him. They just killed him a couple of years ago because of me.
Who was they, and how did they kill him?
The cartel. When they found me and hit me 5 years ago, About 2 years after that, Pat and I were seen walking out of my lawyer's office. Pat thought they were coming to get me. So we made a call to get some security to get me out of there, kind of like what's going on right now. And he went home, and they held him down and shot him full of fentanyl and killed him right there. He was dead within 48 hours after he protected me. Yeah, I carried that very deeply. I loved him. I love him.
Yeah.
And it was all about, but he helped me build the original empire.
How did you guys do that in Seattle?
Well, at that time, I was bringing cocaine up. That was in the early 1980s. And Pat was a distributor, but he didn't have the Mexican connection.
Right.
And my cousin, my primo Tyler, was his friend. And Tyler said, well, you got to meet my cousin Hal, man. He's off into this. But Tyler and them were all drug users. And the one thing the cartels, and I write this in my book, Fox and the Lion's Den, the cartels don't like you wearing lots of gold in those years or driving fancy cars or living outside of a means that can be explained. And Tyler, my cousin, may he rest in peace, he was a drug user. And so we backed away from him immediately.
Right.
And we started meeting very serious business people that had the money to buy the kilos. Right. And pretty soon word got out that we have a Mexican source here in Seattle. So the Canadians came down, and I started working, and that's how it built.
Right. You had the best price, the best quality.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody's going to buy from anybody else. Why would you?
Well, we wouldn't let anybody buy from anybody else. We controlled the market. The Cubans tried. I just made a call to Sinaloa. They sent up a team, and a couple days later, there wasn't any Cubans left in the Seattle area.
You're kidding me.
Oh, no. No,
You're talking about murders of Cuban drug dealers?
I'm not going to commit or confess to any murders. I'm just going to say there weren't any more Cubans moving cocaine in Seattle about a week after I made the call to Culiacan.
So you are completely dialed in with the bosses down there.
Absolutely.
They know what's going on in your territory.
Absolutely.
And you have carte blanche to tell them, hey, I need help. And they'll send hitters up.
Absolutely.
Wow, my God.
You know, I grew up around Chapo and them before they were bosses. You have to understand our history goes back 40 years.
Yeah.
And so when you have a relationship that long, as your friends down in that country become more developed and larger, you're one of them. You are you're compadre, you're paisan,
you're
family.
A peer. You came up together.
Yeah, you came. They remember.
Wow.
We'd sit around and smoke doobies and laugh about the old days when we were all kind of broke and things weren't going real good. And you know, as we're sitting poolside in their mansions full of prostitutes and pounds of cocaine laid out on the coffee tables, and everybody but us getting high.
So you didn't get high?
Oh hell no! Pat and I were taken to a ranch outside of La Tuna. La Tuna is a town that Chapo was born and raised in. And I flew down to Culiacan with Pat. They asked us to come down, and we were wanting to negotiate to get more kilos north. So that's what we thought the meeting was about. And as I explained in my book, they drove us out of Culiacan, took us up in the mountains to La Tuna, and then at a ranch probably 15 to 20 kilometers south of La Tuna. And we pull in this ranch, and we see this guy bound in the middle of a corral, and we see all these young sicarios or kids around the corral. And the two soldiers grab me and Pat, and they take us over to the corral, and then they let in 3 Rottweilers, and they ate this guy alive right in front of us. And the ranch owner, the boss, the jefe, he came out and called us into his house, and he says he was wearing a lot of gold jewelry. He was driving new cars. He was putting himself out there where he was drawing attention. So if you want to keep buying gold chains and driving new cars, the next time we call you down here, you're going to be in the corral. And that's a true story. That's how the cartel started changing. This is the Medellin University concept that was coming into play at that time. You know, we witnessed multiple executions. I remember having dinner at certain ranches where I would see bound people load into the back of the truck, hear the crack in the distance, and 30 minutes later, they're coming back, sitting at the same table with me eating dinner. I've driven under bodies in Juarez that were dangled off overpasses that were mutilated and hacked up, and sitting there on the phone talking to somebody. Oh, I got to move the car a little so I can get it by the bodies that are hanging under here. I grew up at that time that the violence became real.
Yeah. Now, when you saw something like that, had your moral compass now started to, flash red, so to speak?
Well, I'm not going to confess or cop to any crime that could come back and haunt me.
No, I'm not asking about that.
But what I'm going to say is this. I had already gone through certain stages of my life where there are things that I had to do to stay alive. And in those actions, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, I was just asking about...
I was 27 years old when I became a trusted member of the family as a result of something they made me do.
Okay. And I asked that because later we're going to talk about your decision to turn on everything and everyone. And
bear in mind, you're not talking to a chivato here. You're not talking to a rat. I didn't get caught and arrested and decided to tell on people to save myself. You're talking to somebody that made a clear decision and was laser focused on taking on an enemy far greater than himself.
But there had to be a moral or some kind of higher purpose for that.
There was a baby crawling across the living room floor with a bottle dangling out of his mouth. That was when I walked in.
Wait, can you explain that further?
That was my firstborn child. And I wasn't going to raise my children up into this. And years later, before I walked in, years later, we were in Mexico at that wedding. Actually, that's when my wife lost her love for me, and we ended up being divorced over it. She never knew what I was. I never talked about my business to my family. She just knew that I was doing very, very good in the antique business and all this real estate, and things were wonderful. And I was required to take her to the wedding, and that's when she saw who I really was. And I watched the love leave her eyes. And then they told her when our son would be 12, that they wanted him to come to Culiacan, and they would put him in school, and they would make him the next blonde-haired, blue-eyed generation. Right. And she told me, I'll kill you if you do that to our child. You will die for that.
And that's what started turning you emotionally away from
he was still a baby. He wasn't 12. They were telling her when he was 12.
But all of this, do you think that
was part of the decision, and the fact that I'd already made mine. I was financially set for life, and I didn't want to live that life anymore. But the problem with it, you're talking about a bunch of us who were peasants. We were kids in our youth that had nothing. And once you start getting rich and wealthy and powerful, you don't want to give that up. I wasn't of that mentality. I was very content with working, building my companies, raising my children out of a crime life element. Do you remember me telling you before the interview that my brothers and sister have all been legitimate all of their lives, very straight, very decent people? I'm the only one that walked that path.
Did they know what you were doing before you went down the first time when you did your state bid in Folsom? Did they have any
they knew.
Knowledge of your activities? They did.
They knew, and they all kept me out of their lives. I wasn't allowed to be part of my own family.
Did that affect you?
Very much. Still does to this day. I've still got a sister and a brother that totally keep their distance from me as a result. Yeah, all these years. But
what about John?
John is my hero. We keep in touch, but from a distance.
I see.
John was a man of great honor. He's a highly decorated Purple Heart recipient from the Vietnam War. Did 23 years in the Corps after that. He's just a highly distinguished, very honorable man. And though I'm sure, loves his brother, I don't think he can ever forgive what I became.
Oh.
He saw things. He would come home on leave and walk into my house, people strapped with weapons and stuff going on. And he knew that I was a bad person at that time, a dangerous person.
Do you think that was one of your biggest losses? Everybody loses something in this game. Would you consider your relationship with your family to be one of the bigger L's?
Now, I'm going to share something with you I've never shared. The greatest betrayal and greatest loss I've ever felt, and I'll never forgive myself, was having to take down a lifelong friend of mine that goes all the way back, and knowing that I had to take him down in order to accomplish my mission and what I had set myself to do. That will never leave me.
Who was that?
I'm not going to say his name out of respect.
Who was he? Was he a gringo or a Mexican?
Probably 10 miles from where we're at right now. 15 maybe, tops.
Was he a friend from
Mexican from Mexico.
Got it.
A child.
Oh, wow.
My age, but we were children.
Right. And did he end up doing life, or did he turn himself around after he got out?
No, we were sentenced together the same day. They gave him 15 years, which was a blessing. Gave his son-in-law 18. And I got my sentence from life mandatory all the way down to 8 years as a result of the work that I had done for the Department of Justice.
So I have to push back a little bit just because that's what I do. and it's out of love.
Please feel
you
free.
You say you had to take a guy down to accomplish your mission, but wasn't that really just to save yourself?
No, not at all. And I'm glad that you're asking it that way, and I thank you for that respect.
Sure.
The reason he ended up getting taken down, and I tried to stop him from coming stateside, the reason he got taken down is because we were so intertangled through phone call communications, DEA photographs of us being together in the United States. Mm-hmm. There was just too much on him. And what I did do, and God forbid me for saying this now, is I did try to alert him. I went to Culiacan and said, brother, you're already a multi-millionaire. Please stay down here. We have federal heat. Right. And it was right after that when I walked in.
Wow.
I tried to save him, but I didn't. And when the commitment came, this is where the military comes in you as a young man, and you're trained in certain ways that your comrades have to be able to trust you as much as you trust them with their lives. And that was the mentality I took on when I made the decision to walk in and go after an enemy that wasn't going to give me my life. Right. You see, when you fight something as powerful as a drug cartel, you better have a bigger baseball bat. And who bigger than the Department of Justice, who have been chasing me for the last few years as the primary target of the Pacific Northwest. I knew that I had a chip to play in the poker game.
Right. But you did have heat on you.
Yeah, I had a law enforcement agent, narcotics division in Seattle on my payroll. So, yeah, I was getting reports when my people were being monitored or observed, federal involvement, things like that. So I had him on there for about 2 years.
So this cop was feeding you information about the DEA activity?
A high-ranking cop. Yeah, a high-ranking cop.
Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, he was a lieutenant grade. He worked narcotics division, Seattle PD. I had a guy that worked for me that was moving a lot of cocaine in the Seattle area, and he actually grew up with this officer. And Mike O'Day is the name of the guy that knew him. Mike is dead, so I don't mind telling you. Mike owes me $250,000.
Maybe you collect after you leave this earth.
Yeah. It's all good. But Mike put me together with this lieutenant. I never met the lieutenant. I never saw him. He never saw me. Mike was our go-between for everything. And what he would do is he would print off sheets that came right out of his department so I could see the stationery and letterhead. I could read the intel regarding the surveillance and that. And then I had to burn it right in front of Mike O'Day. Mike would photograph me burning up his sheets. So there was nothing evidentiary that could ever take that.
Right. And how much were you paying for that information?
Thousands.
Yeah.
I would say a minimum $2,000 for a sheet, but I probably paid him $90,000 in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't cheap.
And it never came back on this lieutenant.
I knew. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah. Right.
That was my story, and I'm sticking to it. You know.
How did it work in the structure in terms of payments? Were you consigned a certain amount? Say it's 1,000 kilos. Is that a typical order from the
what I would
Culiacan,
pay?
or?
What I would pay him was I'd pay him what I felt the information was worth. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. I meant for the product, for the merchandise. Trying to get a sense of how the structure worked. Were you cash on delivery when you were buying, or?
Oh no, this is me. I didn't pay a penny up front. Everything was brought to me.
Yeah.
And I had absolute trust, of course. These are my childhood friendships, you know.
Right. And so then your customers, are you just giving it to one guy? Is he doing the distribution, or how did that work?
No, I had over 30 people in my employ at that time. And the people that worked for me, I only had 3 lieutenants that directly dealt with me personally. Right. And they were all under a guaranteed death sentence if anything happened to me. Right. They were informed that, and they knew that. They witnessed death, so they knew that they were involved in a very serious game. So the bottom line is I was totally shielded even by distributors. And years later, people go, oh, yeah, you were moving 200-300 kilos. And, yeah, we were buying your kilos, so you got to know this guy and that guy. And I just tell them I didn't know anybody. You know, I was home raising kids and opening up my stores. And I worked a normal life. And at nighttime, I was this drug dealer. You know?
And all these bricks just get delivered to you. You don't even have to leave Seattle.
Yeah, they were delivered to my safe houses. And then I would go out and confirm the count. And then I would get away from it as rapidly as possible, and then distribution would happen.
What was a typical order?
250 to 350 kilo loads. That's where I was at.
And then what does that take you to turn around? How much time?
Days, week, not that long.
Yeah.
I had really good sources up in Vancouver. They could cash me out for 200 plus kilos in a day. They had that kind of money.
Are these biker gangs, Hell's Angels, or who were they?
Well, I used to be in an organized biker club. I would never talk about any biker clubs, so I'm not going to say that at all. But what I will say is that I did have Russian involvement. I did have an Asian community that picked up from me, from my people.
Okay.
I did have different organizations,
Right.
and I want to make it real clear now in this interview that in the time that I wore a patch on my back, I was affiliated with Bandidos Nation. I was never asked to spy on them. I never did spy on them. I honored my brotherhood. And I remember when I got my bottom rocker, I was in the Amigos at the time, and down in Panama working a human trafficking case, and we're all sitting in this bar at the end of the day, and one of them goes, "Hey, Hal just got his bottom rocker." And they all said, that's why we're down here, so Hal and his friends can ride those highways and wear whatever the hell they want. And they actually had respect towards the clubs.
Interesting.
And I've always respected them for that.
Interesting. Yeah. So
Well, they weren't involved in my drug business or anything, so there was no, but I wouldn't have spied on anybody like that anyway.
Right.
I would have turned in a patch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So you were just in this club as
For me.
you.
I loved the brotherhood concept.
Yeah. Wow.
And the brothers, I had a private investigation agency at that time called Surveillance Services Northwest. I sent you a copy of my license. And at that time, when I was in the club, they would want to investigate people getting close to the club that had like hang-arounds and stuff like this. So I did that for the clubs, and I was glad to do it because if somebody was heat or something, maybe I could prevent a murder or an execution or something like that. But I actually had some of my patch holding brothers approach me on the side and say, "Man, you're a freaking mercenary. Can we get into this? This is really," but I've never admitted that to any club holders because that would get them in trouble. And
so
a long time ago.
So if things are going smoothly in the business, as smoothly as they can go, I assume you never have to worry about payment because you've got an army of sicarios from the other side willing to come up and collect if need be.
I made examples. I did make examples of a few people that were lagging in the business. And I didn't need to call anybody up for that. I was quite capable of dealing with that myself.
Okay.
And with some of my own soldiers, if you will.
Right.
And it's very important that I did dirty my hands in those days because word would get out that, you don't want to do something wrong with these people.
Do most of the bosses from Mexico get their hands dirty on their way up?
That's how we all came up.
Is it kind of necessary?
You don't have a choice. That's just how you come up. It's like I said, I got tapped on the shoulder one day and had a guy reach around and pull a pistol out of my hand and said, "Now we trust you." And I was 27 years old.
Yeah.
And when orders come down, there's no such thing as squabbling with the orders.
Have you forgiven yourself?
Absolutely.
Do you think God has forgiven you?
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
I believe that.
I do too.
But that's a terrible, immoral, mortal sin.
No, the sins that I have witnessed in my lifetime and seen are certainly a lot more immoral and a lot more terrible than taking a life. I've seen very, very bad things that I will carry the rest of my life. I feel bad for things I've seen, but it's all part of the journey. When I became interested in becoming a pastor and all that, it wasn't some guy sitting there using it as some kind of shield or something. I truly felt my calling. And at the time that I entered the prison, I decided to take those years and do my seminarial completions. So I was cramming like crazy. And like I said, Johnny Gambino, who threw my feast when I got ordained formally in the prison, everybody around there knew that it wasn't some kind of a game with me. They realized how serious I was. And as a hospice counselor trained by the hospital department there, I would sit in those death rooms at night and watch people die, and I'd be cramming doing my seminary studies in death rooms. And I did 2.5 years of that before I completed. And I think I sent you a page out of my Bible with all their names. And I took 24 fellow prisoners through the dying process. Yeah.
So what year was it that you decided that you'd had enough?
The fall of 1993, I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office with the most powerful attorney in the Pacific Northwest. His name was Murray Gooderson of Culp, Gooderson and Grader, and he handled only organized crime cases. And when I walked in, I was taken to him by a family attorney who had gone through school with him and said, "You're far beyond anything I can ever do to help you, but I know a guy." And Murray Gooderson interviewed me that day and said, yeah, I will retain you, and I will make the calls to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I will set it up.
Yeah.
And he said, but you got to follow through if I do this for you. And we did. When I described to you about that meeting, it was historic.
Right. It had to be shocking to them.
To them, yeah. I made sure I was wearing my 3-piece suit, dripping in gold and diamonds. I walked in, giving the impression immediately of just exactly who the hell they had sitting in front of them.
Right.
I didn't want them to compare me to some guy moving 20 or 30 kilos a month type guy. I wanted them to know that they had an underboss in their presence. Mm-hmm. And they did.
Is that because you wanted them to know that you had the best information?
I wanted them to know that I was putting my life on the line, and this was a gambling chip. All I wanted was to not go away for life with no hope for parole. I already had kingpin status. They had it. They had the status on me.
Now, would an option have been to simply quit, to have taken your millions and fled somewhere?
Well, you can't. The cartel would have just hunted me down and killed me for that.
Could they have found you if you would have gone to Europe? Or?
Brother, they can find you anywhere in the world. Believe it.
Really?
Yeah, I dealt with a Spetsnaz officer one time down out of Colombia. I was going down there negotiating 2,500 kilo deal with him. And he told me, he says, you know. And these guys actually had satellite system times on the satellites that were going around the globe. I mean, that's how connected. He was directly involved with the Politburo.
Right.
I mean, that's the kind of people that the cartels have. They have more money than their governments do. They can buy any form of intelligence services. Right. No, I knew I had to root out the people that were coming at me that weren't going to give me my freedom. You know, the love and handshake, it's kind of like the Italian thing. The guy that kisses you is the guy that delivers the death.
And there was no option of saying, giving the business to one of your best workers and telling
That's what I did. I went down there to negotiate their people, taking over command of what I had built for them, for their organization. And they were all in agreement. And I got home to 350 kilos, a third of a ton sitting in my driveway.
And you didn't want
2
that?
days. No, I was down there saying I'm done. And I had made the commitment to my child, to my wife. And
so you think if they hadn't delivered that load, if they would have respected your wishes to step away, you wouldn't have betrayed them?
It wasn't betrayal, it was survival. There's a big difference.
But do you think they would have let you go free?
They didn't. They didn't. Flat out didn't. That was their message.
I see.
I got home to a load waiting for me.
Right.
That was the message. So I like I said, I turned the load around, feigning federal heat, and the next day walked in.
Did you send them the rest of that money, or did you hold on to the money?
I kept a few bucks.
Sure.
I kept what I needed to survive what I was going to go through. Everybody calls that your escape fund. Yeah, you keep a certain amount of money put aside in case you have to try and vanish. But all they do is cut your wife's head off and drop your kids in vats of acid and put it on a film and let the whole world see it, so they know that you will see it eventually. That's what they do.
When you walked into that meeting with your lawyer and the U.S. attorneys, did you know that you were on their radar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had an officer on payroll who told me, they're making moves around you pretty rapidly. They knew who I was. They had identified me.
Right. So they recognized you when you walked in?
Oh, my God, yes. It floored the AUSA. Doug Wally was the U.S. Attorney representative, and it floored him. He just gave me a couple hours, and when we stayed there, and then they took me into this large conference room with a really long table, and all the way down both sides were alphabet agents. CIA, DEA, ATF, IRS, on and on and on. And they're all looking at me, and they're kind of pissed off because they wanted to take me out.
Right.
They didn't want me to walk in, but they never knew really how deep I was with my commitment to them. When I walked in and said, I'll route this thing out for you, I meant every word that I said. And within a few short months, they were cutting me loose into foreign countries with nobody watching me. And I mean, I earned their trust right away.
Okay, so when you say, I'm going to wrap this thing up for you, what do you mean by that?
I meant that I was going to disassemble the Pacific Northwest faction controlled by the cartel that controlled me.
Gotcha. Meaning take down all of their operatives in the area that you once controlled.
Take it all.
Were you going to try to get them... Were you going to try to wrap up people in Mexico as well? Did you make that promise to them?
I did wrap up people in Mexico and further south.
Where?
I was in Central America, a few different countries.
So this is 1993.
Yeah.
Tell us who the bosses are, at this time. Who Pablo is basically, I think he got killed in 93.
He did. I was in Acapulco undercover with the CIA and DEA doing an operation at the time when Raul Arellano Felix flew in from Bogota, and I was sitting at the table there. I didn't even know he was coming in, and he left me a card, and it had his name on it, which was very significant to the DEA and CIA. It was confirmation he was at that meeting. And he was weeping, and he just said, they've killed Don Pablo, and none of us had the TV on. We didn't see it in the news, and that was the day it happened. And then, of course, that night we turned it on and watched everything that the world had already seen.
Now, who in Mexico was the biggest target at the time in 1993?
I can say the Sinaloa drug cartel, and specifically lieutenant grade level people, which I got. I got them.
So that would have been...
I didn't take out Chapo or none of the bosses. I was aware that they were target objectives, and I never brought up my village in Durango until 5 years ago when I confessed to a killing that I witnessed as a kid. I protected those that I loved.
So if your goal wasn't to take down the bosses or your village, which I can respect, what was the point of even doing it?
Great question. It's like the way I built my organization. I had layers of people between me and the actual distribution points to where I was protected. But the bosses in Mexico do the same identical thing. So I wasn't getting my kilos from Chapo. I was getting my kilos from somebody a couple steps below him. And those were the targets that we went for, were the targets that I could get closest to.
Right. And so then they wrap those guys up and get them to ideally flip on their boss.
Well, they certainly try, but a lot of people know better because they have families living down there in that country. And we all know what happens to those families.
Okay, so you are now working for the alphabet agencies.
Department of Justice, correct.
Now, the CIA, what presence and involvement do they have in taking down high-level drug targets in Mexico, Colombia, et cetera?
Well, look at the Iran-Contra affair that Oliver North exposed back in the 80s. The CIA, of course, was directly involved in all of that. Mena, Arkansas Airport, things like that. So, the representatives there at that meeting, I can only assess were there knowing full well that I would soon be traveling out of the country. The CIA does not work in America unless they're doing a joint effort operation under the guise of the Department of Justice. Only then can a CIA agent question or act in any capacity. They are the FBI of the world, not of America.
So then how did you deal with them in Mexico? What was their function for you? Were they just a fixer, a courier?
No, joint operations. When I was down there in Acapulco, I was down there, I think that one was a 1,500 kilo deal I was setting up. But that night, the CIA with joint DEA were photographing planes that were coming out of Central America doing parachute drops of narcotics in the foothills. Wow. And it was all news to all of us at the same time when Pablo got killed.
Right.
We were down there on other unrelated business. And I remember breaking away from the house and getting to the hotel where the agents were at, sitting in the lobby for hours waiting for them to come in from the field. And when they came and they saw me and they, did the heads up nod, yeah, okay. And the deal was whatever floor they were staying on, I would get off on the elevator to the floor below, walk up the stairs, and then identify myself that way.
I see. So they're essentially just intelligence, just like that's what they do.
Yeah, that's what they were doing.
The Central Intelligence. So when they're working in foreign countries, they're just there to support the DEA in intelligence gathering.
Let's just say the CIA does a little bit more than that, but that's good to go if that's what people want to believe.
No, we want to know the truth. What do they?
Well, the truth is the CIA does whatever the hell they want to do.
They kill people.
Yeah, of course. They are granted immunity. No country can lock up a CIA agent.
Right.
They're diplomats.
Yeah.
And they do what they feel is necessary to do for the preservation of liberty in the United States of America. And I commend every one of them for it. Yeah.
How's that working out now? The entire world's walking away from us.
Yeah. It's the politicians that put us there, not the CIA, brother. And not the military.
So your first foray, your first mission, now that you've turned yourself in, is in Acapulco?
No, that was 15, 16 months after I started my first mission. Started in Mazatlan, Sinaloa.
Okay.
I was under an SAC down there in the office, and that's when I got kidnapped. I was in the SAC, special agent in charge of the office, knew that I had a very heavy meeting going on in Culiacan. It was to meet a general in the Mexican Army at the airport. I would fly by helicopter out to his ranch, do an eyes on 3,000 kilos that my supposed Canadian counterparts were wanting to purchase. And I got snapped off en route to the airport. Was driven off the road, grabbed, bagged, bound with 2 Mexican nationals with me. They didn't make it. When we were taken into interrogation, up until 5 years ago, I've never been honest about that with anybody because I was told by the SAC that if I let them know what they did to me, that it would become a safety issue. My cooperation would stop in that instant, and I would have to face the rest of my life in prison because that was only about 3 months into the 19 months, I believe. I can't remember exactly, but I still had a lot more work to do to work the life sentence down to where I got it down to.
And how much time did you owe them working? Did you have a set amount of time?
I had to earn whatever I could earn from life.
Of course, that's what happens, that you work for them as long as they say.
Well, I had a little bit more control than that because they knew how valuable I was to them. They've never had anybody walk in of his own free will, not under arrest and not even under threat of immediate arrest, do what I did. This is a personal vendetta. Had nothing to do with, oh my God, I'm going to go to jail unless I tell on everybody.
Well, it sounds like it because you're working off a life sentence. So it sounds like it was self-preservation.
No, the self-preservation was for my family. It had nothing to do with me. I knew I was going to get killed anyway. You can't go against something like that and not expect death.
Okay, so what was the agreement that you had worked out after that big meeting in Seattle? Let's start there. And
the first thing they did do is not arrest me, but they stamped me on a green card instead of a blue card and said, as of right now, you're cooperating and you're working for the Department of Justice, multiple agencies.
Right.
I had an SRE number with DEA, an SA number with U.S. Customs, and just open files with other agencies. It was amazing to them. I made careers for everybody involved. Two of the agents that I truly love in my heart that went through 30 years with me of my life. Both of them became SACs, one of Seattle, one of Miami-Dade office. And I remember in their retirement getting him texting me the U.S. Customs guy. He was a greenhorn when he met me 30 years earlier. I was his first case assignment. And he's going, you should be standing here with me, brother. Because I helped get him all the way to the top. Okay, and I texted him and I told him, well, I am with you, brother. And that was the last time we communicated.
Okay, so do the bosses down in Mexico, all of the names that we've named, do they know that you flipped?
They didn't at first. They became aware later.
How long did it take them?
A year.
Okay.
Maybe.
So now we're back in Culiacan. You're getting kidnapped.
Yes.
Tell us exactly what happened. The 2 guys you're with got killed.
Well, what happened was the SAC opened up his big mouth and let agents know in Culiacan that I was a UC working for the Department of Justice. Very agencies telling her on the payroll of the Sinaloa drug cartel. Of course. So they made their move, took me out while I was en route to the airport to go meet the general, climb in his helicopter, go look at the load. And they took me to a black site, an interrogation site that's off the map, if your audience doesn't know what that is. I was still bound. They kept the bag on my head as they were beating me. They suspended me in the air, my arms behind my back, ropes. Well, it's hard to talk about it, but ropes lifting me up off the ground while they were beating me, jabbing me with weapons, and then they put a gun to the side of my head and pulled the trigger, cocked it, pulled the trigger, cocked it, pulled the trigger repeatedly. And I started losing the concept of it because I wouldn't give them anything. I did not tell on anybody. I took it, and I was ready for death. And I still live with the certain sound of a click. Puts me into an almost catatonic state to this day. Because every time it clicked, I thought that was it.
Right.
And then I heard English-speaking voices rushing in, and then I remember hearing gunfire, and I remember somebody coming and pulling the bag off my head, and my face was so beaten at the time that I was non-recognizable. And I remember this guy holding a picture of my face in a plastic card, and he was saying, "Are you Hal Bradley? Are you Bradley? Are you Bradley?"
Right.
And I need a second.
It's okay.
Apologies.
That's okay.
I could only shake my head.
Yeah.
And I remember them cutting the straps off me and carrying me to a helicopter and medevacing me out of there. And then I remember the debriefing, and I remember hearing the screams of the two men that were with me, and then their screams stopped. And then I remember nothing. And then I woke up in a medical bed, and I remember at that time the SAC said, well, if you let anybody stateside know what's happened, you know, this will be the end of you working off your case, and you're going to go to prison for life and all this, because he flat screwed up. He put me out there. It was a hard day.
So how did that conclude? Why did you survive?
Because I was rescued. They extracted me, got me stateside, healed me up. They didn't give me stateside right away. They had to get rid of bruises and body damage.
Right.
And once I made it stateside, I remember one of the DEA agents saying, well, it was never meant to be anyway. And I just said, F you, why did you put me in that situation if it wasn't meant to be? And the primary target was the president of Mexico's brother, who had ties to the Cali drug cartel, not the Medellin cartel. And these were his kilos. And these federal agents in the Mexican federal agencies were paid to protect that information by the cartel. Yeah, it was a heavy case.
Wow. But I guess that case never went through because you got exposed.
That case was classified. What happened was that's the president of Mexico's family.
Right.
With absolute confirmation that they're in the cocaine business. Wow. And I'm going to say for your audience that it wasn't the president of Mexico. He had a brother that was involved.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't meant to be.
Right.
But we had him.
So you could have had him if your handler, the SAC, hadn't screwed up.
Yeah, we would have had him that day.
Wow.
Yeah, we had agents on site and everything. It would have gone down.
Now, do you think they would have shot you if you hadn't been a gringo? Do you think they think twice after the Kiki Camareno thing about murdering
No,
Americans?
I do not. I think that they would not have shot me. I think that they would have tortured me over a period of days and let me die slowly and painfully. But I think that the reason that they didn't was they were under orders just to extract information. You know, they only had me a couple of days at that time. On that particular time I was captured. There was another. But I always worried more about what I had witnessed being done to people that took days to kill them than I ever did about getting killed. I figured I was going to get killed anyway when I made the decision to walk in. I just needed to get my family distance from it. And
Now, did they protect while you're working? Did the government put your family in witness protection?
Yes, they moved my family, yes.
And that must have been a huge load off your conscience.
It was. We had work to do. We got them out of there. And I mean, and like one of the agents I told you that I loved so very much, literally shielded me with his body one time on $1 million coke buy I did. And he was there, and I mean, they were shoving me into a sheriff's car, and he was shielding me with his own flesh to make sure no round got into my body. And that's the kind of commitment that we all held years later through the growth.
Now, after this near-death experience in Culiacan, it's safe to say your cover with, Sinaloa, that organization is blown.
I was.
So, but then you go back to Mexico. They say, we're going to give it another try.
I did, but I was also, at that point, I started becoming operational in Chicago, which was the Cartels hub. I write about it in one of my action-adventure novels. I took out the #1 guy for them in Tucson. I had another reference point to introduce me to, and I went under another identity and got him wrapped up in a few days. Right. And he was the #1 in Tucson. And Operation Tucson Cartel is episode 1 of the 12 books I've written on the action-adventure novels.
Okay.
I'm so sorry I didn't bring them to you. I should. Okay. I brought them down for you.
How many over the course of this?
I worked New Orleans too, and worked Los Angeles, worked Oakland, California.
Now you say your goal was just to take down the Sinaloa Cartel
originally, yes.
Originally, but it grew and grew to encompass the entire United States of America.
Yeah, I started actually getting a feel of deliverance, if you will. I was a Cub Scout. I was a Boy Scout.
Right.
I was in the United States Army. I've taken multiple oaths in my lifetime, so there was always the side of me that knew that I was doing wrong, but keep chugging anyway. You're into that world. And I don't know. I was in Leavenworth Federal Prison when I was approached there and said, well, how would you like to go before a judge? We'll make this go away and become a DOJ contractor, an actual contractor.
Okay.
And that's for the 17 years of my life that I did.
So yeah, let's explain how you get into that.
Yeah.
So
That's how I got into
before
that.
you go to Leavenworth, how long are you working with the government as part of your proffering?
I worked 19 months before they took me before the judge.
Okay.
And by then, from what I was told by DEA, was the cost of cocaine had gone by $2,000 a kilo higher in the Pacific Northwest because of the damage I did.
Right. How many operatives for the cartel had you wrapped up in 19 months, do you think?
Multiple, but I don't know, because a lot of it, once I get something into motion, my part would be done. Another part would come into play.
Sure.
I would do introductions and introduce other agents undercover to people, and they would take them down later.
And had you worked anywhere besides Mexico?
I have. Some of that's classified. I can't discuss it on your show. But I've worked in Costa Rica. I've worked in Panama. I've worked in a few other countries that I cannot discuss.
Okay. So at the end of 19 months and all of this work, successful work that you've done for the feds, do they say now it's time to go do some time?
Yeah. They were really, really in my corner. By then, I had earned my bones with them.
Right.
They knew that I did do everything possible. I had completely eliminated the entire corridor in the Pacific Northwest. I took it all down.
Right.
I wasn't able to protect certain people. I was able to protect certain people. This is, we're laser focused, and I needed to know that I had enough credibility established with the Department of Justice to where their agents out in the field risking their lives knew without a doubt they could trust me.
Right.
They knew.
Right.
And like I said, I wasn't some drug user or alcohol. I wasn't anybody that screwed around. I was always very serious.
And you don't know how much time they're going to give you. It's like you do as much work as you can, and then you go before the judge and hope that they have your back when it comes to like a character reference. And
what I saw was the serious commitment in the final months before the sentencing date came, how the guys were feeling towards me. How dedicated they were to me. So God only knows what they were saying behind my back to the law agencies, the attorney generals, and the people the prosecutors.
Right.
But I knew that I was in pretty good hands.
Right.
And I had survived some pretty incredible situations.
Right.
Some of the agents had survived some pretty incredible situations.
Well, yeah, you had almost been killed.
Yes. Well, an agent can't do what a contractor like me can do because an agent's never been dirty. Hell, I was dirty for 15 years.
Yeah.
So when I would be infiltrated or inserted by somebody else of an organization, I can talk that language instantaneously. And they know within minutes. I can assess as they assess me within minutes.
Right.
We know that they're real.
So you go for sentencing. Was this in Seattle?
It was in Seattle.
Okay, it's about 1995.
It was September of 1994.
Okay.
I went in prison in October. They gave me 30 days after they sentenced me to go home and be with my wife, which has never been done for someone like that.
Did you repair the relationship with your wife when you decided to start working for the government?
No, it never got repaired after Culiacan when she saw my world.
To this day?
My wife is dead now. She came back to me when I got out of federal prison, brought the kids and spent the night and said, "Can we fix our marriage?" And I told her no. And she dropped dead of a heart attack. I lost her. And I regret that.
Why did you say no?
Anger. For selfish reasons. She had found someone else to supposedly start building a life with, but he was not good to my children. And I wish I hadn't told her no, because I still love her to this day.
Yeah.
But sometimes our emotions create foolish decisions.
You were young too.
Yeah.
Let's not forget this.
I was 39. No, I was 41 or 42.
Yeah, you were just a kid.
Yeah, we've been... Yeah, I'm 70 now, so you're right.
So what are you sentenced to?
They sentenced me to 8 years instead of life with no hope for parole. And then the judge said, well, you can take 30 days, put yourself in order, just report to the prison. I mean, it was like amazing. Everybody was shocked. I was shocked. Yeah. But he did it so I could say goodbye to my children, my family, and He felt I earned it. They knew they could trust me. I wasn't going to go run.
Right.
And
were you paid for your time working?
They put me on a payroll the whole time I was working, but I didn't start making bounty money until I became a contractor. Yeah. Then you're paid by job.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
A whole different ball game.
So you go into the feds. What's your first stop?
First stop was Inglewood, Colorado, FCI Inglewood, right next to Florence, where they're holding Chapo,
right,
the Supermax. And then I fell ill, very ill, and they medevaced me to Springfield, Missouri, to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. And I volunteered for an experimental drug, and here I am 25 years later. Yeah, I was going to be dead within a couple months.
What happened?
My liver was shutting down.
Wow.
So they did injections into me, and 9 months later, I was totally cured of the Hep C virus.
Wow, okay.
And by that time, I was already being trained to be a hospice counselor, had started my seminary studies. I was very busy.
And you went to Leavenworth, where
what happened was after I did a couple years there at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners, and then one day they just said, you're being transferred to Leavenworth for your last year. I said, okay. So I went to Leavenworth and opened up. I worked in the education department, helping guys get their GEDs. Yeah. And then I started a hospice training program, getting them certified. And I worked with Hospice of Leavenworth coming into the prison, and we would train these guys on 10-week cycles. I did 4 classes in a year, and giving them a chance to learn compassion for other human beings instead of going out with anger. It was amazing. It was incredible. Yeah. And I was in the news all the time, and it was just really a big thing. And even the Warden Booker of Leavenworth, came down and saw me one day and said, geez, you've really started something here, and I think we're going to continue it on. And I want to share something with you, brother. The last night I was in Leavenworth, I was out on the yard, and one of my brothers came and got me and said, hey, come with me. We're going to take you and give you a little party, a going-away party. So I go downstairs in the basement of the holding area where we were at, and somebody hits the lights, and there were several hundred people there, guards, the hospice people from out of the prison, the warden, all of them were there to send Pastor Bradley off.
Wow.
Never been done in the history of Leavenworth. I keep getting these never been dones.
Yeah.
But it was really, really encouraging, and that's how I left prison.
So with, your whole life changed, and you've now got a doctorate in pastoral studies. And
I didn't have the doctorate at the time. I completed bachelor's almost to my master's level in the prison system. I went to the University of Sedona in Arizona and completed to my doctoral studies. Correspondingly, they allowed me. But the moment I walked out of prison, I had a 5-year tail on me, a paper tail. Right. And I was sent to a halfway house, and within 24 hours, DOJ officials showed up, took me before a judge, and here I am doing UAs. I'm on federal parole, and I'm flying into foreign countries, buying 500 kilos of cocaine and doing drug deals.
Okay, so then
that's amazing, isn't it?
But why? Why, if you've seemingly got out of the life though? But you did your time.
They came to me and said, "How would you like to become a contractor?
Right.
And let's just finish your prison sentence right now. We'll just end it." So I got my freedom.
So get rid of the 5-year tail.
No, the 5-year tail came after my release. They still kept me on paper.
Right.
It was part of the condition. They just made my sentence shrink down to nothing, and I walked out.
But what I'm asking, though, is you got out of prison for doing all this work beforehand. So why did you then...
I didn't get out of prison for doing all that work beforehand. The work I did before was what got me down to an 8-year sentence.
Okay.
I was in the system, and one day I get hauled into the warden's office, and, hey, you're going on a plane, you're going back before a judge. Don't know what's up. So I got flown back to Seattle, and agents stood up with the U.S. attorney, who by then was friendly with me. We were very compatible. And they said, yeah, we can use someone like him.
Oh, I see. Because you only did 3 years off an 8-year stretch. You still owed them another 4 or 5 years.
Yes, I did. You do 85% time in it.
Right. So you still had at least another 4.
4, yeah.
So this is their, hey, we'll get you out early
under
offer.
Condition.
Okay. Could you have said no to that offer?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I could have. But I took 24 hours and really thought it through. And, I knew that I had a talent for it. I knew that I knew I had the respect of a lot of agents in various agencies. I knew I could trust them.
Did you feel like what you were doing was also right?
Yes, I did. Absolutely.
Okay.
By then I had been formally ordained. I was a minister. I was already accepted at a church in Seattle, Washington, which I was reordained February 3rd, 1999 by a bishop. And 3 years after that ordination, I was installed as a senior pastor of my own church under his domain. Wow. And I worked it about 2.5 or 3 years as a senior pastor. But I was jumping off on missions at that time, and I couldn't do both. So I got a sabbatical from my church, stepped down, and started going after drug dealers, human traffickers, weapons dealers.
Okay, so let's go into this.
Yeah,
so now you're a mercenary.
Yeah,
now you're like off the map, deep as deep gets, undercover.
Brother, I'm off the hook at this point.
Right.
Because I know how the feds need me to work, and I know how to infiltrate and be inserted into various agencies they were targeting.
Okay, so who are they targeting, and where do you go first? Take us through your time there. I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what would happen is they would say they would make an arrest in a foreign country, and this person would be willing to cooperate. So what they could do is, since that person is not known yet by their own organization to have been placed under arrest, they can bring me down under my other identity that the U.S. Marshals had created for me, the Canadian cocaine buyer, or whatever.
Right.
And he would say, yeah, we've been working with this guy in Canada. We want him to fly down. I want to introduce you. And that's how I would insert into these organizations.
You were a kilo buyer from Canada.
Or something, a human trafficker, whatever.
Tell us about the human trafficking really quick. What does that mean?
That's a hard one. I've witnessed a lot of very bad things in that industry there.
Is that children or are those migrants seeking work?
This isn't migrants being moved. This is young people being sold into the sex slave trade.
So that's real.
That's more than real. It's happening as we speak right here in the city as we speak.
Right.
It's horrifying. It's ugly.
Yeah.
It's they deserve to die slow death, and I'm a man of God.
Right.
But
well, God isn't against punishment, you know?
No, he
Forgiveness is different than punishment, is it not?
The man that killed me, the man that was sent to assassinate me in 2020, when I came out of the coma a day or two later, first thing I did was forgive him. Yeah. All I was a name and an address on a piece of paper. Right. I've been in the same spot he was in.
Yeah.
You know, I understood it.
So,
but getting back to the human trafficking, I know you have an interest in that.
Where does that come from? Mostly Colombia?
No, a lot of it comes right out of the villages in Mexico. Some people literally sell their children because they don't have enough means to survive the others.
Right.
A lot of it is transported out of South America and through Central America. They end up in the shipping ports of Mexico, and then they're delivered stateside by transport as a rule. But I've actually been in houses where I've seen children in rooms kept. It's, again, very hard for me to talk about. Why couldn't I save them? Why couldn't I do something? Right. Why couldn't I kill the bastards? Why didn't I?
Right. It's the ugliest part of civilization.
There's nothing uglier.
So that means there's buyers for, obviously, prostitutes, but
mostly
also
rich, fat white guys.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're in Montana, they're Idaho, they're Nebraska, they're in the places you wouldn't even begin to expect them to be.
And are those guys buying these children from these trafficking organizations and holding them captive in their
prisoners? They're prisoners. I have a man, as you know, I'm opening up the Crisis Victory podcast, which I'll be coming to you to help me with.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
And one of my people in there was sold into the slave trade business. He was kidnapped from America, transported to Tijuana, and was left naked and chained to a bed for 2 years and sodomized by only males. And he was a guy, a kid.
Wow.
And his 2 years that he spent in captivity, which I'll be sharing on my show, it was very hard for me to listen to what he survived and went through. But the good news is when he got out, he killed the guy that was watching him and opened up the doors down there where the other children were at. And they were running in the streets of Tijuana naked, every one of them. The police came in, surrounded them, and he was taken to the embassy, the consulate, because he was an American. And so the story goes.
So you were able to help dismantle some of these human trafficking organizations as
and
a mercenary.
Weapons cases too. And arms is a bigger business than narcotics or people. It's the biggest business in the world. Is
that right?
Absolutely.
Are we talking about weapons from America smuggled into Mexico?
Yeah, I did a case. It's in one of my books actually. A guy had 6 Stinger missiles for sale outside of Boise, Idaho. And these go for a few $100,000 per missile. And we went after him, and the story's in the book. But I worked with people that needed weapons in Mexico, and they come to the gun shows and stuff like that and buy tons of weapons, but not the kind of weapons we're talking about.
Who's buying Stinger missiles in Mexico?
Cartels.
For shooting at military targets?
For shooting at anybody that's an enemy.
Right.
Yeah, the Stinger missile is a heat-seeking device guided missile.
Wow.
You take down planes with stuff like that. Yeah. Those are high priority targets for organizations to go after that are government organizations.
Right.
But
So how do you take that? Do you pose as a buyer or a seller of weapons? Like how does that work?
I actually tell a story in one of my books how we did it. Yeah, I get infiltrated and introduced as a buyer. I'm representing a group of people that knew that I'm a Nazi racist, because Idaho, you have a lot of white supremacy people.
Right.
And, I have ink on my arm from my Swazis and stuff when I was in another life. And, and of course, having the skill set that I have from a lifetime of living in that, it's very easy for someone like myself to get inserted into that. And they are not college level degrees people. They're idiots. I mean, you're talking about really devoted Nazi white
the dumbest of the dumb.
Yeah, they are.
And so you're posing as a buyer for cartels or just for yourself?
No, never for myself, always for an organization and always with lots of money, showing lots of money.
Right.
It's the hook.
When it's too good, when it looks too good to be true, it usually is.
It usually is. Well said, my friend.
Were there any cases, so you're just you're getting paid per operation now?
Yeah, I'm a contractor at that point. I'm paid according to case.
Do they give you a gun? Are you allowed to kill people?
No, I'm not allowed to kill anybody.
In self-defense, I assume you are.
Well, yeah, in that case, of course, but normally there's cover on me from a distance.
I see.
Sniper cover or whatever. It's always a car full of agents sitting outside of a residence. If I'm in that residence, I'm wired. They're hearing the conversations. All of it. I was never afraid to wear wires because I was, the stature of the way I carried myself warranted. Don't even question me. Don't get near me type of attitude.
Right.
But if we thought, and there were occasions where I wouldn't wear listening devices on me, then I didn't wear listening devices on me. You assess according to the person you're dealing with.
Now, I assume because of your history with Culiacan and Sinaloa, you can't do missions there anymore. You're too hot.
Yeah, I'm wanted.
Yeah.
I'm definitely wanted. I was working a dope case up in San Diego and in just south of Tijuana. Rosarita, actually. And I came back up, and a sheriff that was a connected department said, we heard you had a $100,000 contract on your head. Be careful down there. Wow. And that's the only time I ever heard the statement made, but I sure believed it. I had some pretty powerful enemies by then.
Right. So you tried to avoid areas where they thought it was going to be obvious that you'd be recognized. Like, did that ever worry you that somebody in a deal would literally recognize you from the past?
Well, you think about those things, but you also understand you have various intelligence agencies behind you that have already done the foreground work before you're inserted into an area. Right.
And you trusted them even after they're up in Culiacan that almost got you killed?
There was only that up in Culiacan.
Right.
That was the only time. And that agent I never liked from the day I met him, but the ones that I trusted my life to were agents I knew for many, many, many years.
Right.
And I believed everything they said.
So this is the late 90s, early 2000s now.
This is in the 2000s.
How had the world of cartels changed from your time, say, in the 80s when the Colombians were
It had changed enough and drastically enough to where a lot of stuff I no longer profiled or fitted into. There were assignments that I would be talked to about, and I wouldn't accept them.
Okay.
I was a contractor now. I'm not somebody working off his case.
So you can turn down jobs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they respected that.
So what jobs would you turn down?
Something where we didn't have enough intelligence gathered from a region where I'd formerly worked. Jobs where I happened to actually know the people and knew that they were loose cannon situations that, sometimes what'll happen is, say, a shipment gets taken off. Well, what they do now, which they didn't do back in my years, is say, well, who's the last 5 or 6 guys that joined in the last 7 or 8 months? Kill them all. And that way we're for sure going to get the one that did it.
Right.
And that's what they do now.
Wow.
And they've been doing it consistently for probably more than 15 years.
You think they've gotten more violent?
I know they've gotten more violent. I know they have. I've lost friends, good people that I've known, in horrible death. Horrible death.
How? Would you mind going into it?
Acid baths, bodily mutilation, limb amputees, where blood's being pumped into them to keep them alive while they're being bodily disassembled, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the culture down there has really gotten demonic. Is that a word?
Yes, that's a good word.
It's a disrespect for life. There's not really a lot of upholding of the what the Christians hold dear, which is life.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Well,
As a value.
It's about control, intimidation, and instilling fear.
Right.
And a lot of the times people that are victimized and killed in those capacities are their relatives, children, mother, father, grandparents, to the target that they're going after. That was always my concern, was that they would take out my family one at a time, something to that nature. And I would be taken out later, of course, but they wanted me to hurt first.
Did as your time as a mercenary, is your family still in protection?
No, when I got out of prison, my wife had already left me and took the kids to be with another man and build another life.
So were you still worried that the cartel could find them?
No, I was not at all.
Okay. Why?
I was already removed from their life.
Right.
And I know how the cartel thinks. I understand the world. I lived it for a decade and a half. They were no longer an asset that I would be afraid of having lost, because in their mind, I've already lost them. Right. So they were protected by her choice to divorce and move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you hadn't been working with them.
Yeah,
you were off the map. Did they know you went to prison? Were you worried about getting touched when you were in prison?
Being in prison was part of my cover. They could check my background and say, yeah, he was in Leavenworth, and and it didn't show that why I got released. We doctored up everything to where if I got investigated, I was a hardcore type guy that, and prior to that, when I went to Folsom prison, I didn't tell on anybody.
Right.
I took my hits and went to prison.
Right.
So I had, it was easy for them to build the image that was necessary to get me inserted into highly organized crime levels.
Now, in the 2000s, this is when Chapo is coming to his full power. This is like 2 and a half decades after.
Chapo's head of the Sinaloa drug
He's a
cartel
boss.
by then.
He's now becoming the most powerful drug lord, at least figurehead
in the world.
Did you hear from him again? Did you hear from his people again? Did you hear anything? Did you have any brush ups with the old crew?
I did not.
Okay.
I was working enough other types of cases in enough other countries that it wasn't necessary for me to concentrate on an area where I would get picked out.
What were some of the most active countries that you worked outside of Mexico at this time?
Surprisingly, Costa Rica. A lot of the Colombian drug lords, a lot of them bought ranches on the Caribbean side. And as I understand it now, I was talking to someone that lives down there recently, told me that those ranches have been seized, they've been imprisoned, and now they're turning them into humanitarian places where Christians gather, and they help people with them.
Right.
But they would like step over Panama, and Panama has always been a hub. I've done a lot of work down there.
Yeah.
And that's a remarkable industry to work out of. But the lords, the real lords, they were in Costa Rica.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So that's their hideout, and that's where they bump coke from. It's a transport hub.
It's part of the transport route
from Colombia to Mexico.
Yeah, in Guatemala, Salvador. I've been in Managua, in Nicaragua, working, and those are hot zones that are highly protected by the cartels.
Now tell us, what do these guys look like? It's not some kid with in the mountains of Sinaloa with a giant AK that he can barely hold. Those guys aren't buying 2,000 keys. No. I've heard that it's erudite, upper middle class or wealthy individuals, usually lighter skinned Latinos.
Not the soldiers.
Yeah, it's not the soldiers. So who's a guy in Managua that's buying 500,000?
An elitist, somebody that's in business and known to be in business, also known to be a drug trafficker. But who the hell cares down there? He's making money for a lot of people. And
are they usually connected with the police?
The case that I worked in Managua, I was inserted into Managua. The police didn't even know I was in their country. It was a CIA thing I was doing. I did a couple of those, but I really can't talk about those on your show or anywhere else. I'm not allowed to disclose that information.
Okay, so we'll talk around it in generalities. How do you make it into a country and they don't know about you? Are you airlifted in by chopper, or how do they get you in there?
I don't know if I want to give up that
Oh,
information.
come on. That's not giving up anything.
I understand. There's agreements I've made, and I have to stand by those agreements. I apologize on your show.
No, that's okay. I mean, this is like Tom Clancy novel stuff.
Yes, it is. It is. But there's also the line of honor. When I tell a man who tells me this is classified, this didn't exist, you can never, ever discuss this, I need him to know that I will never, ever discuss this.
Okay.
Because it's beyond respect. It's survival.
What was a case that you helped make that you're most proud of?
That's classified. I can't talk about it. There's one that stays with me, and I'm very sorry. I can't. It's
was it a drug case? Can you tell us what kind of case at least?
Inserting. I was inserted in a country south of Mexico, but north of Costa Rica. I was captured. I was held in a prison camp for 7 weeks with another agent of that country, a foreign agent, and real bad things happened to him and me in there. And I'm under current treatment from the VA about it, and it's so deeply classified that I can't even tell my doctors.
Do you think that's where you mentioned having PTSD? Do you think that's where that comes from, or was it the incident in Culiacan when you got kidnapped?
There's, I think, a multiple of incidents. I've lost friends and brothers horribly, and I've witnessed things. I've done things horribly. I just lived in a very bad world for a long period of time, and my reclamation from that world and trying to climb out of it, there were things that I had to do to get out of it. There were things that I watched being done to other people, children in a room being held, things to this nature where I didn't do anything, and I regret those decisions.
Wow.
I regret those decisions.
Wow. Yeah.
Those
So you'd say that was
those are things we live with. What happened to me in that particular agent of that particular country, my government doesn't even know I was there. It had nothing to do with America. I got approached by a foreign intelligence agency because I had a connection with one of the people they were going after from federal prison, of all places.
Wow.
He had written about me in a letter. They got the information, and I was at the American Embassy in Mexico City doing something else in my country, and I was approached on the side, and so I met them for dinner, and they offered me a whole bunch of money, and I went ahead and did it, and yeah, we got caught.
do you think that was a setup?
No.
Okay.
No, they had an agent of their own in there with me.
Wow.
Yeah. The funny thing is, the guy that I was in prison with, which gave me the association, which was the end, was, oh, yeah, have him come down and visit type thing. And we show up down there, and immediately we're both grabbed. We were hauled to an undisclosed camp that moved us for the 7 weeks we were in captivity. And I never even saw him, and I think they used that because the agent I was with was blown, and that's how we got caught.
Okay. His cover was
It wasn't
blown.
me.
Wow.
Yeah. I was just in a bad place.
You're lucky you are alive.
Yeah, I wrote about it in one of the books, but I camouflaged the way I wrote about it. But the way we got rescued, I'll tell you this much, was the camps we were at were called dry camps because they were moving us.
Dry camps?
Yeah, dry camp is where they don't have running water.
Okay.
So they have a water truck that comes in.
Right.
And what the agency of that intelligence agency, that company did was pour a chemical into the water truck. And several hours later, everybody in the camp was knocked out. They were sick virally from it and knocked out. And the 2 truck drivers were paid off to let it happen that came out of the camp. And then a team came in and got us from their country. And that's how we got rescued.
And they gave you the word, don't drink this water.
There was no word given to us. We were bound, to, we were bound to 2 trees sitting outside right at the edge of the perimeter of the jungle camp that we were in.
Right.
And we were watching everybody going and getting water, not thinking that all of a sudden everybody's falling over. And then all of a sudden, bang, 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 they came in and got us out of there. But
you don't have to, I'm probably overstepping here, but do you think that was a Navy SEAL kind of extraction?
Nothing is like our SEALs. I've been around them, and they're amazing. This was this particular country's own intelligence people and their own special forces team that came in and rescued us.
I see. Wow.
And they paid me a lot of money for it. I'm not going to say how much, but it was a lot.
But you still got paid, even after?
I got healthily paid.
Okay.
And my country never had any idea. but it's because of my country and me being in one of the embassies
Right.
where somebody spotted and found out who I was. And by then they've thoroughly examined my credentials. They know that I've been in prison. They knew I was in the cartels. They knew I would profile.
Yeah.
And my name was in a letter that some guy from Leavenworth wrote home to his family about. And hey, I've got my friend And so then they find out that I'm an operative. So it's perfect because I'm a contractor. I'm a freelance operator. And that's how I got caught up in that.
Right.
I've never talked about this ever.
Wow.
You're the first.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing that. So after that incident, did you continue working or was that it?
I continued working. I was down in, it was 2018. I was going down to meet a cartel pilot through an associate of mine in Sonora, Mexico, in a town called Ciudad Obregón.
Yeah.
And I had a friend of mine and a neighbor, and it was affiliated of their family, and they knew that I'd been a drug dealer and all this. And they said, hey, well, we've got this cousin of ours who's a pilot for the cartel flying heroin into the States.
Wow.
So I made a call to the agency and said, hey, guys, I got this. And, we have what's called the Brownsville Act. If I go undercover representing as an agent of the United States into their country, under the Brownsville Act, we have to notify Mexico that we are inserting an agent into your country. But his mother dropped dead, and I was there. I'm a pastor. So they had me go into Mexico just as a pastor doing the formal funeral rites for his family, as what I told him. So I didn't have to get turned in where I would have gotten killed for sure.
Right.
And
you didn't have to check in with authorities.
I'm not under the Brownsville Act.
Right.
I'm going down there to bury a friend's mother.
Right.
So while I was down there, they connected me with this guy, and I was able to disqualify him, actually, to where we didn't pursue him as a case. But that was the weekend they moved El Chapo into the United States. The Sinaloa Cartel blew into 10,000 pieces. I'm right in the middle of it. I'm listening to people getting shot 2 doors down in the neighborhood I'm at. They put me in the trunk of a car, drove me through a couple cartel checkpoints, got me to an airport, walked me on a plane. I flew into Tijuana from where I was at, the Obregón airport. And when I stepped off, I took a taxi to the border, walked back in the United States. I was met by agents. I was debriefed by agents. And the next morning I said, I'm done. And I retired. And I retired in 2018.
Wow. After
17 years.
Wow.
17 active years.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That's unreal.
And I had agents texting me and calling me after I retired saying, you really paid your debt back. You really did what you said you set out to do.
Yeah.
You should feel good about the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And then you're going to read in the book of Fox and Lion's Den how a few years ago they set me up with 2 kilos of heroin, had my house raided. I got busted with 2 keys. But somebody, I believe, in the DOJ made a call to the prosecuting attorney's office and just basically made everything go away.
Wait, who set you up with 2 kilos?
The cartel that killed me, the ones that assassinated me.
Attempted to assassinate you.
I left this world. I felt myself leaving.
Okay.
I don't know how I revived, but I think God.
What do you mean
me.
though? So they found you and.
Well, they found me, and what happened was they came and gave me. What they did was they came to me, and you were asking about my wife and kids, and this is going to be interesting to you. Guy pulls. I just did a bedside hospice job up on the 6th floor of Providence in Everett. And the guy passed away. And whenever they pass, I always go down to the river there, have a cigarette, sit on a log, and reflect on a good memory of the patient. And I remember pulling in the parking lot, and I look in my rear view mirror, and I see this really nice pickup pulling in behind me. And I got cold chills right then. So I pull in, I jump out of the car, and he gets out, and he's standing there walking towards me. He's got the Sinaloa belt buckle, the hat, the lace shirt. I knew he was a mid-level cartel player the second I saw him.
Yeah, guys like that don't walk around Seattle, Washington.
Yeah, it wasn't to come and he wasn't there to execute me, but I thought he was. He reaches in his vest, so I figure he's pulling out his gun to go ahead and put me down. So I just turned and faced him, just being defiant, and go ahead and take me. You've got me. There's nowhere you're going to run at that point. Yeah. He's 15 feet away from me. And instead of pulling out a gun, he pulls out a cell phone. And he clicks it and he scrolls it and he walks over to me, right up to me, and he shows me all 4 of my children. Now, that morning, my son, who lives with me, was wearing a black jumpsuit with red stripes down the legs. And I'm looking at a picture of my son in a black jumpsuit with red stripes. So they knew I had my kids covered. My daughters I haven't seen in years. They had gone to live with other people. And I'm looking at my one daughter with children coming out of a Walmart, a son in a parking lot of a small strip mall, and the other child was at a church in a church parking lot. So here's all 4 of my children. And I remember just kind of freezing. And he's like, come here with me. And he takes me to the back of the truck and he hands me a little duffel bag. 2 kilos of heroin, a couple pounds of meth, I think, or something in it. Nothing they would want a guy like me. They would hand me 100 kilos.
Right.
So I knew something was really weird right then.
Right.
He says, we want you to put this out on the street. And what they wanted to do was destroy my credibility and ruin my leg.
Right.
Because they had obviously been watching me for a while. My daughters were adopted. I don't know what their last names are or where they lived. That's why I felt my kids were protected.
Right.
So what happened was somebody on a law enforcement payroll was able to give the cartel access to it. Wow. We believe it was Beltran Leyva's family. They took out the cell and they were 60 miles north of where I was living.
Wow.
So anyway, I grabbed it and Pat was still alive. And I turned to Pat and I said, I've never sold heroin in my life. I don't know what to do with this. He says, you got no choice. I showed you the kids. Get the out there so their police people can know you're dealing or whatever they want you to do for your punishment. Pat was very wise like me. He understood our world. So Pat helped me do that. And they came back and I just couldn't do it. I said, screw you, get the hell out of here. And the guy looked at me like this, shaking his hand. And less than 2 weeks later, they hit me.
And you still kept the dope though?
Oh, no. I let the narcs, they couldn't find it. I took them right to and gave it to them.
Oh, right. Of course.
You know, I needed to let their law enforcement officer on payroll know that I actively did what they wanted me to do. That's why Pat helped me in putting it out on the street.
And when you say their law enforcement, the ones they're
police
paying
officer.
off, the cops at the
absolutely.
And you think it's a Beltran Leyva, but Beltran Leyva, those guys
they
got
have cells all over
but they're not even a cartel anymore.
You have a picture of them. They sure as hell are, because the FBI told me not 3 months ago that that's who they were. Oh. They came by to let me know they did get them.
Okay.
But in the completion of the story, when they came by the next time and I rejected them and they left, when the guy came knocking on my door at midnight, he was wearing a tow truck driver's uniform with the company shirt and the name on it and the hat pulled down. I mean, he was dressed like a tow truck driver. And I have a classic Corvette Stingray in the back there. And he says, yeah, I'm a tow truck driver. I actually hit your car. Can you come down and take a look at it and we can do the paperwork? And I woke up out of a dead sleep at midnight, so I wasn't thinking at all.
Right.
Walked down the stairs.
Was he a Mexican?
No, he was a white guy. He was a cartel killer, white guy. And he says, no, you hit it down here. Can you take a look at this? I dropped down to my knee and I knew. As soon as I dropped down to a knee, I knew in that instant. And that was the first knife strike that hit me. And then I went into defensive posture, but he was extremely skilled and well-trained, and he had stabbed me multiple times before. And at the same time, he's delivering blows to various parts of my body, immobilizing my body.
Right.
And I'm 65 years old, getting just totally mauled by this guy.
Where does he hit you with the knife?
He got me at the top of the head. He was trying to hit the neck, like you just pointed to, to immobilize you, and that's what we're taught in the military. And the last knife strike, when he hit me, I heard my head pop, and the blood was covering my eyes, and I started losing. I knew I was going to die. Yeah. And that's when I got that feeling of, well, it's okay. I quit worrying about being in the world. Yeah. I started getting ready for where I was going. Yeah. It was beautiful, brother. I didn't want to come back to this.
Right.
And that's a true story. That really happened that way.
And did they leave you? Did he leave you for dead?
Oh, yeah, he left me dead. He left me. I was gone.
And he thought he had killed you, I'm sure.
Well, I was slipping into darkness. Yeah. Just like the song said.
Right.
And we both, because he could feel my giving up. He could tell that I knew I was dying.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it was like a lightning bolt hit me or something. I kind of got an electric charge in my body, and my eyes opened. And I remember crawling to the back door of one of my tenants. I have a 5-plex.
Yeah.
And I knocked on the door. They came in, 911, and next thing you know, I was in and out of consciousness. I remember a forensic nurse talking to me. I said, this was a cartel kill order. Please secure my room here in the hospital. Get me protected.
Wow.
And they didn't probably believe it. I don't know. But when I was under for a day and a half, and when I came out of the coma, there was no one there. So I called Pat. And Pat got down there within minutes with a couple of guys to protect me. But got me out of there and got me back to the same house I got hit at, because I have security upstairs. Right. And a couple months later, I got served the papers saying, well, we're going to prefer charges on you on the heroin we found, which is fine. I knew the truth would come out, that I wasn't out there dealing of my own free will and all that. And I remember the judge at the sentencing thing going, Jesus, God, he said, you really ought to write a book and do a movie. And I said, well, Your Honor, I brought you a copy. I'll sign it and give it to you. But they were blown away. Yeah. And a couple months ago, this happened about a year and a half ago, the sentencing part. And a couple months ago, I went to the courthouse to present him with a couple of the novels. And his clerk came out and said, we still talk about you almost every day.
Wow.
We've never had anybody like this in our court.
Oh, I believe it.
So it was really cool, good
So
things.
what was the sentencing, though? Not
a day in jail. And I'm with 2 kilos of heroin in possession with intent to deliver.
Yeah, but didn't you, I thought you were going to give that up to the cops.
I did give it. They hit me with a search warrant. They took me downstairs in cuffs. This is really a good part of that, what happened. They hit my house. I had 5 people there, homeless people I was feeding and stuff. Half of them had warrants, so they were arrested immediately. Right. I'm hauled down the stairs and cuffed sitting on a bench. And guy says, well, we know you were in the Banditos and all that, so we know you're old school, da-da-da. So that told me right there they didn't have any idea who I was.
Right.
They were just a warrant team.
Yeah.
And they were announcing over there, we got Bradley in custody. Well, their boss was a commandant in the Linwood office. And I believe it was told me he overheard my name, rushes down there, comes there, says, take the cuffs off of him, gives me a hug, said, what the hell's going on, Hal? And I'm saying, well, I can't tell you because I need to prepare an attorney at this point. Right. And I knew the Department of Justice would need to be notified.
Right.
And
did they ever get the guy who stabbed you?
As was my understanding, they took out the cell completely.
Okay.
That's what I was told.
No surprise. It's kind of a suicide mission when you act that brazen.
Yeah.
But
we do know they were located 65 miles north of Everett and Bellingham. That's where the cell was operational. And that's how we think they may have just stumbled upon me by accident.
Right. After all those years.
Yeah.
Right.
You're talking 30 years ago.
Right.
And, but boy, life can come back to get you, huh, brother?
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Like a lesson in karma and just faith in a way that you survived.
Yeah. A 2-time striker. Walking out without doing a single day in jail with 2 kilos of heroin. Think of that. Just think of that.
So your life now is obviously you're writing the books. You've written the books, and
I'm a pastor to the homeless as I've been for 19 years. My love is in the dope houses and in the camps. And having people brought to me that are in need. Yeah. And I do this every day of my life, and I feed every day of my life at my home. And I'm just very careful and cautious as to who I allow in.
Right.
I know the streets well enough. And recently, in the last year, I backed away from working in the trap houses. They're just too dangerous.
Yeah.
They are.
Is that because of fentanyl? Or why is that?
It's definitely because of the desire for fentanyl. And plus, I'm tired of looking at some of the dirty stuff. I see underage minor girls sitting on a couch waiting for their turn to go into a bedroom to have sex with some guy for a $20 hit. I'm tired of looking at that stuff.
Yeah.
Watching a couple kids sharing the same needle at a kitchen table and then crying because their self-esteem is so low and what they feel about themselves. And now, basically, what I do is I'll feed some of the locals, and if somebody's like in an overdose state, the Veterans Administration, they provide me with Narcan kits, and they know the work that I do for my community. So I insist people bring overdose cases to my home so I can bring them back. They won't take them to the hospital. They got felony warrants out on them, and they know they're going to get dope sick if they get arrested.
Right.
So that's not my place to judge that part of their life. Just help them.
Why are you doing this? Why are you... After all these years?
Because I truly care. I truly care about every one of them. There's no other agenda to it. Mm-hmm. It's just caring for another human being. Mm-hmm. When you've seen and experienced as much as I have and seen what I have, then caring about humanity becomes the ultimate objective of your life, or what do you have left of it.
Considering all of that you've seen, the worst, the horrors of humanity.
Yes, I have.
Have you lost faith in humanity or actually been strengthened by it?
That's a good question, and I haven't really thought of it in that context. All I do is every day I wake up with absolute joy in my heart, waiting for what he sends me through the door and being ready for that. And that's the truth of it. That's my life. I just dealt with a 70-plus-year-old woman that was ganged by 5 guys last month, and she's coming around now, and she was brought to me. And, she was beat up and tore up, and they her for her money. A little bit of money this old lady had. But the nice thing is she was brought to me to deal with. And I ensured her no police involvement. We'll take care of her. I let her clean up in my home. I did her laundry. I set her on a couch, and then I waited for her to talk about what she wanted to talk about. These are tragic things, and people need to be able to release according to their own ability, if you will, to do that. But that's what I do with my life. And I write books and working on the podcast show. I'm dying to get it going. I love your podcast show. I've watched it, and I've been on many podcast shows. Yours was probably one of the very best, if not the best.
Thanks, Dr. Hal.
You do a good job.
And you were one of our best guests. I can say that.
I want to thank you for that. I gave you my whole today.
Well, I don't want you to ever lose faith.
I never will. Nothing mankind can create would take that from me.
Wow. It's powerful.
Thank you for that.
Tell us where they can buy your books. And I would recommend starting, because you have many books, I would recommend starting with this one, A Fox in the Lion's Den. This is kind of a much more detailed account of what we just talked about your life story.
Yes.
Where can they find those?
Lowercase dr halbradley.com takes you right to my Amazon site. And then all of the books I've written are listed there. And aside from this one, which is my autobiography, the other books are fictionalized renditions of One Man's War Against the Cartels, based on my true life story, but animated for entertainment.
Sure.
And some of the books are written, they're pretty graphic. I would caution the readers to be careful if they don't have the stomach to read what happens to people in these type of situations. Right. But they're pretty amazing. I tried to do it to honor the special forces teams, the law enforcement agencies, the contractors like myself, those of us that are outside the wire, putting our life on the line.
So these are fiction books, but based off of real life events of your time undercover.
Well, in the 17 years that I was operational, I would be operating out of various embassies in various countries. Teams would come in from outside the wire, and they would get debriefed to come down to the cafeteria, and we're all sitting together. And we sit away from everybody else because they're not like us. And we start talking about stories or whatever we had just gone through that we can talk about. And over 17 years, I had amassed dozens and dozens of stories. And I said, oh, my God, I've got to start writing these action-adventure novels. So to your audience, enjoy the books. They're absolutely amazing. And they honor people that deserve to be honored. They're dedicated to them.
And we'll look out for that podcast just as soon as you get to it.
The Crisis Victory Show.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you.
Dr. Hal, thank you so much. He's going to stick around for a little quick bonus episode, patreon.com/theconnectshow. Go to his website and check out his books. And once again, brother, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
From one Northwest boy to another, we made a real connection. Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.